The true role of a manager is to unlock excellence in other people. It's never failure to bring in help to solve a problem. Relatively early on, I kind of realized that culture capabilities people were going to be the biggest thing to solve. Empowering creators to make the human experience more extraordinary.
Hi, my name is Rohit Bassi, and welcome to the People Quotient podcast, where we focus on the most important asset in your organization, your people. In this podcast, I'll be speaking with CEOs, investors, and executives from around the world to learn how they build high-performing teams. Without further ado, let's listen in. Cameron, how are you, mate? Good to see you. It's been ages, and we've recently caught up, but man, I've known you, both met you, 16, 17 years ago, something like that?
Yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah, good to see you, man. Thank you
Good
for
to
taking
see you
time.
too. Yeah.
So for those listening in or watching this video, they'll soon pick up where you're from as soon as you start speaking. So I won't give it away, but maybe in that spirit, why don't you give us a little bit of a background of your journey? Because I find it really interesting and super fascinating because you've had lots of different, very diverse, I mean, amongst all of my friends and people I know, like super diverse background and from how you've landed where you came from. So maybe share that with our listeners and we'll go from there.
Yeah, happy to. As you know, it's a bit of a long and winding journey, so it's hard to give the short version and actually still have it make sense. But I actually started my career doing an apprenticeship as a chef when I was 17 years old. So worked the first 4 years of my life full time in kitchens, and I think people would have picked up by now from my accent that I'm Australian. So working in restaurants in Melbourne, and something that I absolutely loved and was very formative. Sort of felt quite an amazing thing as a 17-year-old to have people treat you as an adult and do your own thing in the world and that sort of thing. And I was really lucky to have some fantastic mentors, most particularly the executive chef that I was working with, who was a British guy who used to work with Marco Pierre White and the Roux brothers and Gordon Ramsay, and came to Australia and at the time thought it was a bit of a backwater for the culinary world. So set about doing his own thing. And I was really lucky enough that I got to start a 3-hat restaurant with him and sort of do a lot of really great things. And he was the first person that really showed me that, a leader is really somebody that can sort of inspire you to do things more than you thought you could, and that you could have big dreams and that there's lots you could do. I kind of realized pretty early on that my life wasn't going to be spent in kitchens. So the sort of story arc goes from working in kitchens to restaurant management, then to resort management. I was actually living in the United States in the late 90s and got into a role where I was helping to install a new financial accounting software for a resort group in the lead up to Y2K, when everything was going to fail. The world was going to end, all bookings would be lost and that sort of thing. And actually had a transition into finance roles. I moved back to Australia. I had a short stint in enterprise software, which was actually working for the company that we got our software from in the States, and then jumped ship to go and work for one of our clients who was in the engineering sector, and I ended up being their CFO. And then during this time, I was apparent to me, but also to them, that they were sort of saying, hey, you're a smart guy, but you don't have a university degree. We kind of need to see some commitment on this front for the board to sign off on your appointment. And so I actually did an MBA. I actually, first of all, did a postgraduate diploma, which gave me entry eligibility to do an MBA, and then did an MBA. And actually coming out of that, spent quite a few years as a consultant. Actually, we met on my first project as a management consultant back in 2008. Started 2008, and I spent more than a decade in consulting, ending up as a partner at McKinsey. I ran McKinsey's transformation practice in Australia and New Zealand. And then the last couple of years, sort of back to industry and doing something that I'd have to say is quite uniquely different, but, extremely fun, which is I run the largest retailer of music instruments and pro audio equipment in Australia. So we have 10 retail stores and about 50-50 split between bricks and mortar and online. So a big online team as well.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I was just trying to write it and I sort of gave up on all the transitions. There's like far too many for me to keep track of. But if anyone listening, and even though I've known you for so long, I just sort of reflecting on your journey. It's just a few words that come impressive, incredible. I know you're a really hardworking person, but I mean, man, you've covered quite a few different industries and quite a few different roles. So I think that's really impressive. And congratulations to have done all of that. A lot of people listening, depending on where they are in their lifetime, whether they're in the restaurant sector or whether in the US, whether they're currently consultants looking to be operators, whether they're operators now, all of them can probably listen into you and sort of say, okay, they can relate to this guy. And even though he's Australian, but we won't go there, And so jokes aside, I really am. It's super impressive. If you reflect on your time across these industries and the roles you've had, what is there one specific, I know they're bound by length of time, but take that out of the equation. Is there one specific role or place that you feel like really shaped you into what you do today, like really transformative for you? I know you were a transformational leader for a lot of companies, but for yourself, what was that role?
I'd say there was many different things at many different times. Like even right back to my time as an apprentice chef, I remember, my executive chef walking up behind me before service one day and whispering in my ear, he said, "Cameron, you're my protege," and then walked off, and it was sort of that moment where it was like, wow, it's sort of like the little dream became a big dream of what was possible. But I'd probably say the most formative thing has actually been to really learn structured problem solving. And it kind of sounds like a bit of an odd thing to say, but I made a big career change when COVID hit. But pre-COVID, I was working on 3 different projects. I was leading a transformation in Japan with a medical devices company, a transformation with a pharmaceutical company in Korea, and with a telco in New Zealand. And I'm neither a telco guy, a pharma guy, or a medical devices guy. What I've learned over the years is how to actually structure thinking in a way that means I don't need industry knowledge. I can actually just sit in a room and I can listen to problems and start to actually really tease out what matters and what doesn't. And so I sort of think that's the thing I brought most into my new role. I don't have a lot of experience in retail. I can't play a musical instrument. I jokingly say that, the cowbell is my preferred instrument, but yet it's an industry that I've walked into and I'm able to have real impact because it's understanding how the business works and what success looks like. And more than anything as well, I'd say it's really working with people. It's sort of, I think part of structured problem solving is actually leading other people towards solutions as opposed to being the person that's like, here's my great idea. It's teasing out what already exists within an organization.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I think, look, I've always said this, and I've been around a lot of service businesses, including the one where we overlapped with, at the end of the day, consulting is a service business. And, I agree with the notion that I always say people are the fuel, to any company. And you get the right fuel and the right engine and, it goes. You just have to let it go. And so when you talk about your current role, we can talk about any of the other roles that you previously held. When you think about this notion of how to, you use the word inspiration early on in the conversation, how do you go about doing that? You sort of talk about structured problem solving, which allows you to tease apart a problem in an unknown space or unfamiliar space, I should say, where you're not the subject matter expert. But then I'm presuming there are people around you that are the subject matter expert, right? And who can provide that. So how do you balance how you inspire them? And more equally importantly, how do you make sure that, in fact, they are the experts that you need around you to help the business, do what it's supposed to be doing?
I kind of feel there's many things that pop to mind when you say that. I think the first would be to say that I think the most important thing is actually really helping people understand what the role of being a manager is. I certainly see this I've seen this throughout all the industries I've worked in, but in the business I'm currently in, there's a lot of people that have really deep functional experience that then leads them to be promoted into a role where they're now managing other people. And what they were really good at doesn't necessarily translate into them being good at managing. And so I always tell people that the true role of a manager is to unlock excellence in other people. That your role as a manager isn't to, sort of do all the thinking and just leave people to do the executing, or to, come down on people, tell people what to do, but actually leaving people with, a sense of ownership in what they're driving towards, in, sort of having an aspiration to do something, that is greater than what they do. And I kind of think that it's one of these things, particularly when, you're in a business like ours where, less than 200 people, about 180 people in the business. It's a limited talent pool. So, there's times you have to work with people that don't have experience in something or aren't particularly good at something. And you can either get very task focused with them and tell them what to do, or you can actually lead them to do something which is inspiring them to do something they haven't done before. And I kind of think that's a very different way of doing it. I'd then say the offset to that is, I always say to people that, it's never failure to bring in help to solve a problem, right? I think often people have a mindset that, if I seek help for something, or if I, need outside assistance, that's me not being good at my job. And so I've actually introduced, we've brought in a number of different consultants and contractors, everything from, having somebody come in and help us define our purpose and values, through to getting in some support on advanced analytics and AI, that we're sort of doing a whole heap of things, at the moment that wouldn't have even been considered, a couple of years ago. We're using, algorithms to help us with our stock forecasting, where we've developed a capability that allows us to, we're very constrained on warehouse space. So we used to always think about it in terms of dollars. We now can actually optimize our warehouse based on cubic volumes of stock, in terms of what we're holding, the way that we're doing personalized marketing, so that, if you're a drums customer, when we send out our mail out to you, it now has drums relevant content to you, rather than just being the same email that goes to everybody. And all that's happened because we brought in outside expertise and learned from them. So it's certainly one of those things. It's not a failure to bring in help to do those things, and that really builds capability.
Yeah, no, I that's such an important piece that you just said, which is capability is, at the end of the day, at the root of trying to get things done. And that lies, capability I define in the book as people, process, and systems. It's just three things, but it starts with the people, but then you've got to add the other two. And in small, medium businesses like yours, you can't have all the people who are capable of doing everything. It just doesn't exist, especially because as the company grows, the capabilities that you need evolve. And so you want in necessarily the people that started with the company, the company may have outgrown them unless they grow with the company and learn new skills. And so even when you bring in consultants or outside help, whether it's short term or medium term, it allows your team to get upskilled by that project. And so they by themselves, then now there's almost like a training part of it, right? They get to learn new things. That doesn't, so the mindset, oh my God, consultants coming in, it's a failure. That's one. But the other one is there's a little bit of fear of, like being almost found out, rather than viewing it as, hey, I might get to learn a few new things, and then I get to stick around and actually build on those things. And so I think it's such an important piece to it. One thing that pops up in my mind as you speak to, working with your teams and helping them think about what it means to be a manager is, you've obviously, in this role, you've adopted a lot of people, right? You came into the role as CEO, and a lot of people were already there before you. And now you've got to learn, as you try to structure what the problems are and where you need help. And when I say you, the company, and what is available in-house versus what's outside. So therefore I need to go get a consultant. How have you gone about evaluating, is there do you have a simplistic toolkit or process or 2 questions or 5, what have you, methodology, whatever you want to call it, that helps you understand the existing capability skill set, that's within your team before you go into okay, now I know the gap? What do you use that you can maybe share with us that may help for others listening to you saying, what, that's it. I'm going to ask that question next time I do it, or I'm going to follow that bit of process. Any thoughts there?
I tend to not be the sort of person that uses a framework. And if I do, it's sort of just a very high level one. It's more come in and sort of work out what to do. So Well, I'll tell you sort of the process that I went through when I joined the organization. Is the very first thing that I did. It's actually, in the process of transitioning, I had a bit of gardening leave. So I actually ran a due diligence on the business. So I basically said, let's pretend I'm an outsider coming in to have a look at this business. What are the opportunities that I'd see? What would be possible? And I actually got a good friend of mine who was, having a career break at that time. He had a startup that got killed off by COVID. And so he actually did some contracting work with me. And, over a period of about 6 weeks, we did a diligence on the business. And I shared that with the senior management team. So I actually went through and said, here's all the opportunities that are possible in the organization. And then said, I want to work with each of you that we crystallize that into a set of projects. And that was actually a super helpful thing because it identified a whole lot of things that were both very obvious skill gaps, like things like analytics, that it's like the reason that we didn't have much analytics in the business is just nobody had analytic skills, but also a bunch of things that were real culturally embedded issues. I'll give you one specific example, is that we worked out if we could bring so this was discounting by salespeople across the business. If you took the same store, the same group of salespeople, so, sort of musical instruments people in our Brisbane store, the variability between the highest discounting person or the highest margin achieving person and the lowest discounter was, sort of 2 to 3% percentage points of margin. And in a retail business, you're sort of typically running at net margins of, 5, 6, 7%. So if somebody's giving away 2 or 3%, that's half your profit gone out the door that you'll never get again. And so during the due diligence, I was like, great, I'm going to fix this on day one. This will be easy money. We're going to clean up and it'll be straight to the bottom line. And then what I discovered is that it's actually a lot more complicated than that. That, we didn't have the business had a history where there wasn't transparent reporting of performance. So nobody really had an objective way of knowing whether they were doing well or not doing well. That there were a lot of, there's a reasonably strong correlation between the tenure of the employee and the amount of discounts that they gave away. And then when you ask people, they're like, oh, that's because, person X is really well connected to industry and, a lot of industry contacts and, that sort of thing. So that's there's a reason for it. And at the end of the day, here I am sitting 2 years later and we still haven't fully addressed that problem. But it's because if I came in, as a hammer searching for a nail and just said, we must stop discounting, people would have felt disenfranchised. I should say the other thing is that the business has a real culture that it's empowering the people, right? So you get to make the final decision. And if now all of a sudden it's like you can't do that, then, you start to break the culture. So I'm working slowly, which is, first of all, let's build our reporting capabilities. Then when we put reports in place, let's have people really understand how to use them to drive performance. Then we work to the point that we can actually have built into our performance appraisals and the way that we assess people, how we can give them objective feedback on their performance and how we can do it all so that the final outcome is that we actually have people incentivized towards and, rewarded for and get feedback on their overall performance in a holistic way, rather than it just being saying, you're on the naughty list, publish a list and say the people at the bottom are bad, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And so I think that's really helpful because I think you started the statement by saying that, you don't have a framework and yet you did have for most people listening to you, maybe by your standards, you didn't have a framework, but by most, I have to say that most small, medium businesses wouldn't have done the diligence you did or hired somebody to do that outside in work, had a 6-10 point strategy coming into a meeting, then walking through the strategy and then taking the time to say which part of the strategy works. And that is pretty full on but I know your bar's high on framework, so I get that. But I think if you step back and look at of the people, because I think you bring up a really important point that, especially as it relates to the topic of people, which is culture, and that you didn't want to change the culture rapidly, yet all the things you're describing are fundamentally changing behaviors, right? Like how you think about the business at a very core level is what you were talking about, which requires some people, maybe all the people, but at least some people to fundamentally shift the way that they've been thinking about the business before you got there, which is change, which is, as you go back to change management, which is all what we do. At the end of the day, managers are all change managers at the end of the day. So how have you navigated or figured out those who got it and were like, let's go, those who got it but didn't know how to go or where to go, and those who didn't really get it, right? They didn't, not that they didn't understand it, but they just weren't on board with it. How did you go about, or how quickly, I should say, you figure that out? Because for a CEO to put the plan in place, you need the team to be rowing in the same direction. And it's very hard to imagine everybody was ready to go in the same direction. So I'm guessing that, but maybe if they were, then we can stop. But if there were people who like, I'm not sure, Cameron, I'm not sure you're talking logical things here. Did you have those sorts of people? How did you identify them? And, where do you decide, yes, I can coach them to be different? And when do you decide, you know what, perhaps a change is needed? And it's a hard one, but it's the right thing for them. It's the right thing for the company. How do you disaggregate all those three things?
There's a lot to that, but I'll sort of say that relatively early on, I kind of realized that culture capabilities people were going to be the biggest thing to solve, right? Like we're an organization and an industry where we don't compete, in the war for talent with corporates and that sort of thing. So it's not like we're getting seasoned industry people with deep experience, that sort of thing. Most of the people that are senior people in the organization have actually grown up through the organization. Mm. And so it was really more about how do we build a framework to work around that. So the first project I actually did and that I got outside people in to do was actually defining our purpose and cultures. So a purpose and culture. So we're in the music industry, a very passion-driven group of people. And I kind of knew that this was not something, if I just suddenly came in and said, this is our purpose, these are our values, this is what matters, it would have been really weird. So I got some external consultants in. They interviewed about 50 people in the organization, ran a bunch of focus groups. I did a little bit of mind nudging from the side, but we ended up coming up with something that I was just like, not only for me that I'm like, wow, this is freaking awesome, but our people are able to rally around, and it helps both describe the purpose of what we do in terms of what matters to us as an organization, but also gives us a really clear framework for how we get things done. And so our purpose that we defined was empowering creators to make the human experience more extraordinary. And it's a pretty noble purpose. And people, when they really tune into that, say, wow, yeah, that's actually what I'm here to do. I'm here to help our creators make the human experience more extraordinary. And it's kind of, whether it's a young girl that comes in to buy a piano and then is going to be a musician for the rest of her life, whether it's somebody that's, setting up a studio, whether it's somebody that's, going to their first business venture, setting up a bar or nightclub or something like that, or whether it's just somebody that their personal passion is creating music on at home studio sort of thing. And then beneath that, we defined 3 groups of values that sit under, we dream big, we connect, and we make it happen. And the dream big part is that we're the largest retailer in the industry. And so we don't have anyone to follow. So it's like our dream needs to be big in the sense that we've got to define the customer experience on behalf of the industry, but also we need to be inclusive in the way that we do that, our people come on the journey with us. And then when we say we connect, it's like we understand our current reality and we can actually turn that into a series of actions that we're going to take that will make the big dream come to fruition. And then the make it happen part is really just about, being excellent execution, building new skills, building new capabilities, and delivering results. So it's it gives a really clear way that it's like, did we have the wrong dream? Did we not connect it to the reality? Or are we bad at executing, in terms of getting it done? So that's been really helpful.
And so, by the way, that's amazing. I think that statement is really powerful in itself, which the vision and that came out of the mission statement, how you want to classify it. But I can only imagine just listening to it feels really amazing to listen to that statement. And for those who've been in the company for as long as they had been, by the time you have gone through that process and then reflect back on what came out of it, in my experience, usually these projects are met with some apprehension, questioning, resistance. Some are really onto it. Some are like, maybe that's your point around nudging, which is encouragement to say participate and, because you don't really know. But I think that goes back to your previous point about consultants, which is, could you have done that or some version of it in-house? Maybe, maybe you could have figured that out, maybe, but that's what the consultants came in and really could extract in a very non-biased way, that they were able to pull this out and then represent it, which I think is really powerful. The question that comes to mind is that when you now go look for new talent, and you're in Australia, you're in Melbourne, but I know it's a national company, and so when you look for talent, how do you use this newfound or vision to guide you in who you get on the team, and whether it's a role that reports to you or someone further in lower in the ranks? How do you use this to inform that decision-making process?
Well, I think it's been like incredibly valuable for us. Like if I think of people that, either I've hired or that the organization has hired in the last couple of years, it's generally been, some link to our purpose that has allowed us to get excellent people. I'll give you an example that, we've been growing pretty rapidly, plus, retail is a world that generally has, fairly high turnover. So we hire anywhere between, 50 and 70 people a year.
Yeah.
And it got to the point that, we actually needed to hire a dedicated recruiter. And so it was like, oh, how do we get this? And what we found is we got somebody that was a career professional recruiter, but actually early in his career was a professional musician, played throughout Europe, was touring all the time. How he got into recruiting is that, he got into a relationship and was like, I can't be on the road traveling the world all the time. So got a job as a recruiter working in IT recruitment, and was just like, I'm good at my job, but, where is this going? And he has been one of those people that connected into, what our purpose is, and is like, I just love this. I love this organization. I love what we stand for. I love what we do. And he's our first point of contact now for recruiting other people. And so he's able to talk to people and say, look, I can tell you personally what this means to me and how it fits and, what it comes down to. And it's sort of, I think a lot of feedback from people that have been in the organization for many years is they're like, this organization was always really special, but I was just never able to articulate it. Now I've been given language that it's like, I don't need to be shy about it, or I don't need to make it up myself. I can just say, this is what we stand for, so it's very helpful when it comes to recruiting, because as I said, we're often not really, we pay well vis-a-vis our industry, but, not well vis-a-vis corporates, that sort of thing. And so often that is where people are making the decision. It's not around money. It's around the purpose, the values of the business, and the culture that we've got.
Yes, as you were saying that, tell me if this doesn't resonate, but it feels like people have gone from feeling to feeling proud. And I think that almost feels that way, which is they're feeling good about what they did, but now they feel proud of what they do, but they can go to this purpose, and they sort of feel like, and everybody, we all are looking for our purpose, right? At the end of the day, and people who, we all work really hard at our jobs. And so you spend 8, 10, 12, 14, depending on what you do, hours at work. And, you always want to associate yourself with the purpose at the end of the day. That why did I do this, right? Obviously there's money and buys you it buys you life in different ways. But this gives you, as you said, it's more than that. It's more about being part of something that's big. And so when you are whether it's you or the person you hired, how do you, obviously, as you yourself said that you weren't from the music industry, and the recruiter as you was on board was from the music industry. And so I'm going to guess that you'll get people who are or not when you recruit them, depending on the functional role. They may be from the music industry or not. How much of what you are saying in terms of the purpose now of the company, do you use that as the yardstick for anybody who is not from the industry and doesn't really quite understand how musicians do what they do, or it seems to resonate agnostic of whether or not they're from the industry?
I think it resonates agnostically, and it was actually also part of the deliberate crafting of what we set as our purpose, because we went through multiple iterations, multiple different wordings and that sort of thing. And we sort of said, is it empowering musicians to make the world a better place? Is it, and we ended up settling on creators because, a lot of our customers now, doing podcasting or, sort of something completely different outside of music. So just to say that we're focusing on musicians was too narrow. And so I think in the same way that, we had people in our team, one of the nicest things that we heard in one of the focus groups is we've got a few non-binary people in the workplace, and one of them said, empowering creators to make the human experience more extraordinary. They were saying that's actually the most inclusive statement that I've ever heard. It's like, that's everyone. Like, that's actually everyone. It doesn't matter what you're doing. We're making a contribution, and it's sort of, it doesn't matter if it's small or large. It doesn't matter if it's, what nationality, what gender, what, background you've had. It's like, it's very inclusive. And so I think it means different things to different people, but there's a language that people can tie into and derive meaning from that. So it's sort of, it is what it is to other people. And I think the second part to that, like I remember when we first came up with it, the director of the company sort of said, I feel like it's a good statement, but it's a bit highfalutin, like I feel like it's probably a bit much. And I said, well, if that's, I said, think about this for a while, but if that's what you really feel, then, maybe I'm not the right person to take this organization forwards, because that's what I'd get out of bed to do, like that's what would matter to me. And it's sort of, if we set an ambition of less than that, then, we could do our bit to make the world a little bit better, and we could, but it's like, I think people want to have a big dream of what they're doing, want to connect into something that's bigger than them.
One other thing that sort of pops up, because I was having a conversation with a few other CEOs recently, and I won't give away where the math ends up, but the question that keeps coming up is, you've got the cultural fit, which is what you're referring to, but then there's also the technical skill set piece of it. Can you do your job, right? Will you fit? So how, for your company and for values that you were setting out and you have been setting out, which comes first in your mind? Like when you're looking for a new talent to join, do you put more emphasis on their resonation with the purpose or the skill sets that they're bringing? How do you compare the two? And then I can tell you what others are saying, but
Yeah.
your thoughts.
I think it's one of those that it's very role dependent, right? I would be, we're give you an example. We're hiring for a front end developer at the moment, to build one of our websites needs updating. I'm going to go technical capability forward on that one.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, it's like once we, if we're down to the final three candidates and, they're sort of, if we've got somebody that's got superior technical capabilities, but we're not sure they're a cultural fit, we'll have a really good debate about it. But if we've got three people that are sort of roughly bring the same capability and one that was, this person has a real resonance with what we do and that sort of thing, we'll always select for that. But when it comes to frontline talent, like the people in our online team, the people in our stores, it's generally very top of the list is, sort of their resonance with what we do, right? And that sort of thing. And I very often hear this. I got pretty hands-on and helped open a new store midway through last year. And it just so happens that it's, it's about 1 kilometer from my house. So I'd sort of go over there every day and check in and that sort of thing. I remember one of the new staff coming up to me and just saying, I just really want to thank you for opening this store. This is the best job I've ever had in my life, and it's those moments that matter, but it's also, that was a person that, when we were going through the interviews, we had somebody that had years of experience, but just sort of seemed a bit jaded and a bit, and instead it's like, well, let's take this person that's, not got as much experience, but is totally enthusiastic about, the overall mission.
Yeah, it's every small business that I've been involved with, whether it's been building it or overseeing or investing, I think that's a trick one, right? Which is passion or technical skill set. And it does depend on the role. It also depends on the needs of the organization and willingness to take risks. So a lot goes into that equation. But, there are people who say, hey, look, if you can do the job, I think, as you said, which is if you got the technical skills, if you're lucky enough to have a pool of candidates that you can pick from, because not everyone is, then you can go with the culture. And it depends on where you're starting. And if it's front lines, as you said, perhaps the customers will see that first, that passion, that excitement. And then they're like, okay, this is good energy. Now let me spend some time, really talking to somebody who knows technical stuff. One word that you keep using in your process is we. that we go about and we have a panel. So is that fair to say that then you've got more than just you who's recruiting talent? Just obviously you got the recruiter, but then as the process goes on, do you have a lot of people in getting involved in finding that ultimate person to bring on, or is it just a couple of you?
I tend to not get overly involved in too many different things. I kind of feel like my predecessor was, like all decisions were made at the top, or any big decisions were. I tend to farm things out in a way and be the person that plays devil's advocate. Just sort of, if I have questions on technical competence, I'll push for, like, have we really thought this through, or, sort of. But I'd actually say that for the vast amount of the recruiting that we do, like I said, 50, 60, 70 roles a year, I might be sort of directly involved in 4 or 5 of those. So most of it is an engine that is self-supporting in terms of the way that it operates. And that tends to be the way that I like the business to run. Like, one of the things that I said, we had what was called our national management team when I joined, which at the time I think had 8 people on it. They tended to be functionally siloed people, so we had somebody that was doing our marketing, somebody doing web development, somebody doing purchasing, somebody doing warehousing, somebody running our retail stores, somebody running our online team, somebody doing people and culture. And I actually flipped that around and said, listen, the way I think a national management team should work is that you actually have 2 roles. One is that you have a functional responsibility in the organization, but the other is that you help make sure that we make good decisions across the business, right? That you actually need to be contributing to and helping us as a business operate in the best way that we can. So I kind of feel like every now and again, I do make a decision that sort of goes against the grain, and it's a bit of a captain's call. But for the most part, it's not about building consensus. It's about really surfacing debates and, even at times not resolving that, but being conscious of it when you make the decision. But that where really people feel ownership and buy-in, and, that they've been able to voice any concerns and that sort of thing along the way.
Yeah, that's really good, because I think you highlighted something that warrants a whole different hour chat, because there is a real good trade-off between, a democratic organization, that balance between autonomy and authority, making sure like you've got voices being heard, but then ultimately if there are 3 people or 5 people sitting around a table, how does a decision get made? And so is it about the how or the who? And so if you've got the right processes, then the who doesn't matter as much, because they'll get to the right decision if you've got the structure. But that all takes time, and it also depends on where the company is in its own journey. And also the personalities, like you can have very distinct and different personalities. And so I think it's a really important point, because a lot of small businesses, when they grow and have more leaders or people in leadership roles sit around the table, as the 2 founders or one founder goes, or one CEO goes into multiple people now on his or her team, and then that starts to grow, there are more voices. How do you triage that? And how do you actually allow the team to do it themselves, rather than relying on that individual, who's called the CEO? And so I think it's a really interesting challenge, and maybe we can have another chat on that, so you can help us say, hey, how did you do it? How are you doing it? Because obviously it's a journey, and every time you add a new person, it may change the chemistry a little bit for the good, hopefully, but you never know. Carolyn, in the last minute or two, maybe we end the conversation with one thing that you think, from your experience, that you would advise or suggest people always do when it comes to talent, people, organizations, the human capital side of things. And the one thing that you'd say, please don't do it, stay away. What would you say to one of each?
I kind of feel like it's hard to distill down to a single point, but it's kind of like the backstop for me. I did a lot of work with a CEO over the years of, I think at the time I was working with him, it was like a $20 to $30 billion company, big multinational, well, big by Australian standards anyhow, Australian headquartered multinational. And, he used to always say, I sort of had the opportunity to sit in the boardroom with the executive team. And, if something wasn't working out, he would always say, no results plus excuses does not equal results. And it seemed incredibly harsh at the time. But, now that I sort of, there's no one else to answer to, there's nobody else. It's a way that I sort of calibrate myself, that it's like, if we're not achieving what we set out to do, what role did I play in it and that sort of thing. But it's also a way to hold the organization to account, right? And I do think that you need to be both an inspiring leader, but you also need to let people know that there's boundaries that we have to work within, right? So you sort of want people to be, sort of pushing into something that is difficult, but not to feel overwhelmed by it, but it's also if, there's sort of just a whole lot of excuses, you can cut through that as well. So I sort of think, being both inspiring, but also setting boundaries would be the thing that I think is pretty important. I think the thing that I'd say that, almost always fails is, a lesson that I learned early in my days in consulting, and ties back to what I was saying, that, the true role of a manager is, unlocking excellence in other people, is, I often see that the default of a manager is if somebody's underperforming, you end up doing their work for them, or partly doing their work for them, or stripping down their role and handing it off to other people, and, just sort of making the scope of work smaller and smaller. And I kind of think that's, generally speaking, where everything starts to fall apart. So, I tend to spend a lot of time looking at the managers in the organization and how they're running their part of it, and trying to unlock that puzzle with them of, how do they get more out of their people? How do they, sort of get that balance of directiveness and inspiration? How do they give a roadmap to people so that they can, sort of get the best out of themselves? Versus the sort of, it's like when it all goes bad, you sort of, people can often get, pretty directive with people. And I don't usually, doesn't usually bring great results.
Yeah. That's wonderful. I think that point around it's also reactive versus being more proactive and strategic about it, right? So when something happens, a knee-jerk reaction often doesn't lead to the right outcome. And even if at that moment it might have turned out okay, it's not the right long-term solution anyway. So I think what you're getting at, implied in your statement, is that if you are looking to build long-term enterprise value, look at the sort of that longer picture and allow yourself. I think part of it's also giving yourself the permission to do this, because a lot of CEOs, and it doesn't have to be CEOs, you could be a manager of a team of 3 people, or 2 people. It's whether you're any manager, leader, any person in a role where they are responsible for other people, giving themselves permission to take the time to do it right is probably what prevents a lot of people when they don't do it to say, I'm going to, chop and change. And that definitely doesn't help in the long run. Cameron, this has been wonderful. I am so excited and proud to have seen you and hear from you in terms of what you've done. This is amazing. Clearly, you're onto something really cool, both in terms of organizational and cultural setup, but also the industry that you're in and the stuff you're doing. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us, and really appreciate it.
Look, it's been great to hear what you're up to as well, and play a little part in sort of connecting to that. I kind of think that people don't spend enough time talking about leadership, so very happy to be here with you.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
Cheers.
Yes, bye. And there you have it, folks. Another episode of the People Quotient podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. And if you enjoyed what you heard, please be sure to give us a like and invite your friends and colleagues to join us in this community. Until next time, stay focused on your people. Signing off, Rohit Bassi.